Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this Halloween floral peekaboo tumbler. Y'all know I am not the biggest fan of Halloween. We do go trick-or-treating, but I do not have skeletons and pumpkins all around my house. So I typically fail y'all on the Halloween designs, but I do like them if I can make them pretty and more of a fallish vibe while still having, that Halloween in there as well. So let's get started. I am using a Big Betty, one of the newest tumblers from Tipsy Magnolia. It's obvious what tumbler brand it is very similar to. However, Tipsy Magnolia tumblers are double walled, of course, with a inner copper lining. So this is actually going to work better than the other guys. And I know this for a fact because I have a couple of those tumblers and I decided to test this one out myself, and it did hold ice actually much longer than the other brand while sitting outside in this insane heat that we have had. I just love the quality of all the tumblers from Tipsy Magnolia. For glitter application, we're using the full glue from Southern Belle Glitter. This stuff is incredibly tacky, so you can do a nice even coat on your tumbler, dry that up with your heat gun on low heat setting, and then apply the glitter. Immediately go into spray sealing, and then of course once that spray paint has dried, then you can go in with your epoxy. After we add our glitter on, for whatever reason this clip cut off, my phone probably died, but after I apply the glitter, I do pat it down really well and then spray sealed it twice with Rust-Oleum matte clear coat, and then gave this one generous coat of epoxy before we sanded. Once I had a smooth surface, I cut a full 12 by 12 sheet, or 11.5 by 11.5, I think is what Design Space will allow you to cut. But I cut a full sheet of random sized spider webs. They're no specific size. I just created an 11.5 by 11.5 square in Design Space and moved these around to get as much on one sheet as possible, and cut them on the Paper Studio stencil vinyl from Hobby Lobby. I do find that this stencil vinyl holds its shape really well versus a permanent or temporary vinyl. So I'm just going to pull the entire spider web off of the sheet at a time and hand place these on the tumbler instead of using a transfer tape. You can use transfer tape. I would just suggest trying to take a little bit of the tackiness away from the transfer tape before applying these, since it does have, I guess, less tack to it than a temporary vinyl. It's not going to stick as well as a temporary vinyl, so it is more likely to lift up from your tumbler, especially if it's sanded, if you are using some transfer tape. I'm going to randomly place these all over the tumbler, and when I get to those curves, I'm going to try my best just to get like the tips of the spider web over that curve that's on the tumbler. And I can use my heat gun to heat very, very slightly to help contour that to the curve of the tumbler. After I applied my stencils, I did take my heat gun on low heat setting and actually went around the entire tumbler and pressed down all of my stencils really well so my spray paint will not creep underneath them. Then I went outside and spray painted a completely pointless ombre because I actually thought it was going to show through our pigment powder, but it definitely does not. So let's just ignore the ombre other than the fact that I do like the color combination. So I am going to create another tumbler using those two colors, hopefully. So we're going to go in with full glue once again from Southern Belle Glitter, but this time we want to make sure that our coat is really even so those streaks don't show under our micas. After our full glue is completely dry, you do not want any white spots on your tumbler at all. So if there's any that's kind of glooped up in areas, make sure you just dab those out with your finger or a brush and then dry that up again. You never want to smear it because that will show underneath your pigment powder or micas. We're using Zombie from PDB Creative Studio, and like I said, I did not expect it to completely cover up that ombre, but when I first did that little spot, I was like, what just happened? Because this stuff looks incredible. And then I was so excited to finish the entire tumbler with this absolutely beautiful color. I just made my way around the tumbler, doing small sections to avoid getting too much falling off onto my sheet of paper beneath. As I was rubbing all of this down into that full glue, I did make sure that I brushed off any excess. So once I do spray seal this, it's not going to have any areas that look clumped up or any streaking. I spray sealed this twice with Rust-Oleum matte clear coat, and then we're going to remove our stencils once that has dried. Now, of course, this tumbler does have a removable handle. You just unscrew a couple of little tiny screws and that handle comes right off, so it's easier to design. I would suggest, however, to check back with every layer of epoxy you put on here to make sure your handle has not been pushed out too far to keep those screws from going back into place. My sort of rule of thumb, I guess, is to have 2 coats of epoxy at minimum on top of any handles that could move, such as if you used a Dimensional Drinks 3D printed handle, if you created your own handle with epoxy, or this one, of course, as well. 2 generous coats of epoxy to me is good enough strength to hold that handle into place. And in this case, where this is a screw-on handle, if you put it on before your very last coat of epoxy and you just epoxy up to the edge of the handle, then if that handle's moved around too much, it can cause that one layer of epoxy up to it to crack. So I always either want to put this handle on very last, or at least get 2 coats of epoxy around the base of the handle so it does not crack as the tumbler is being used. Hopefully that makes sense. It does in my head, because anytime I do my final coats, I always do 2 final coats to give additional protection on top of my decals, and I do that when using other handles as well on different style tumblers. So we obviously popped that handle back on. We added on our cute little decal, and now we're going to add on our florals. This decal and florals are part of the August bundle with Gracefully Created. We do these bundles every month, and I'm so sorry I have not had these tutorials out before the last few bundles, but life has just been crazy hectic for Judy and I both, and it just hasn't been practical to get them out before the bundles actually release. However, this one, I do have a few projects going. I can't wait to have a few tutorials for you for this bundle and to show you the entire bundle in our next tutorial. It is absolutely amazing with fall and Halloween combined. Right now, I just have the florals, but in my following tutorial, I am going to show you the entire bundle and all the juicy details on how to get yours and where. So when we are working with a curve on a tumbler, you want to cut as close as you possibly can to whatever design you are applying. And then you want to move that around and position your decals in a position where I guess the smallest elements are going to fall over the curve. So as you can see, the cluster of the florals is more up towards the top portion of the tumbler, and then we have all those little scraggly pieces down at the bottom. This is going to help contour the smallest portion of the decal over that curve without getting any lumps or bumps in your vinyl. So we're going to start at the top, get the easiest part knocked out first, and then down there at the bottom we're going to trim around even closer to those little pieces that are falling over that curve. When working with these types of decals, you can even take your craft blade and cut alongside of the florals. So you don't want to cut straight through the design and then overlap in areas, because obviously you'll be able to see that. However, if you cut right along the petals of the flowers or any of the elements that are in there, if they overlap, it's okay. I just cut off any of the clear portion that is overlapping each other. Hopefully that makes sense, because you will be able to see if clear overlaps. However, if you have an element that of course is printed and it overlaps another element, you're not going to be able to see the outline of that, especially if you cut it really close to the edge of the floral or elements, whatever in the design. Putting a large decal like this over a curve is not easy at all. I mean, honestly, it took me a while. This is sped up double time, and you can still see that I'm really taking my time trimming right up against those flowers. So whenever I do lift them up and press them down, if they overlap in another area, it's going to look seamless and just like it was part of the design. Using your heat gun can help shrink or stretch the vinyl, and you only want to apply a little heat at a time. You can see I barely hit it with the heat and it was already curling up. If you hit it with too much, it can cause your vinyl to curl up on itself and ruin that area, and you definitely don't want that. So if you use heat to help press that vinyl down around that contour, apply very little heat on low heat setting, and it will help you work that vinyl into that curve. Before we epoxy, I'm going to add some painter's tape around the base of my handles and then give this 2 final coats of epoxy. We're of course using a little extra incorporated turbo dry epoxy for the first of our 2 final coats. I always like to use a regular epoxy for my final coat. Although you can use a facet, I feel that a regular epoxy with its longer dry time is going to have more durability, so I always want to use that as my final. ALE is a thin to medium viscosity epoxy, so there's no need for me to heat either part. They work really well in putting them in the measuring cup, mixing, and application. Their turbo dry epoxy has a really long work time for a facet, so there's also no need for me to rush trying to mix. And I can work on multiple tumblers or projects at one time without worrying about my facet epoxy setting up too quickly on me. With it being a thinner viscosity epoxy, I can get a even thin coat all over my tumbler, helping to cut down on the bulkiness, especially when working with a design that has multiple layers like this. And I also don't use as much epoxy as I would if it were a thicker viscosity. So although this is a 40 milliliter tumbler, I am going to have some epoxy left over, although I mixed 30 milliliters and I can use that on another tumbler. Once we were finished with the epoxy, I decided I wanted to bling the handle a little bit, so we're going to use SS20 Metallic Rose from PDB Creative Studio. Before we get started, let me first say I made a huge mistake here and did not prep the plastic before I applied my liquid fusion and my rhinestones. Do not put it directly onto the handle because they are going to peel right off. Ask me how I know because after I finished my final recording, these actually just popped right off, and that's simply because I didn't sand before I applied my glue and rhinestones. Take a very small piece of sandpaper, I would say at least 320 or below, fold it up and very lightly go in the areas that you're going to apply your rhinestone, sand that down, then you can wipe off and proceed with adding on your liquid fusion and your rhinestones. Like I said, after I finished my final recording, those rhinestones did start to peel off, so I am going to go back and sand in the areas that I placed my rhinestones and redo that area. But I think this tumbler turned out absolutely beautiful. It's a perfect combination of fall and Halloween in one beautiful and boot scootin' spooky design. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below for me. I hope that you love how this tumbler turned out. All materials I have used will be listed down in the description below with some discount codes for you. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. That really helps us out. That is all for today. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.